In the heart of our quiet cul-de-sac lived Mr. Thompson, a proud Vietnam veteran whose stories echoed with honor and sacrifice. There were remnants of glory in his tales, the camaraderie forged in the jungles, the resilience displayed in the face of adversity, and ultimately the weight of battles fought long after returning home. With an air of humility, he'd often reminisce about his service, yet his eyes would reveal an all too familiar burden. The scars of war extended beyond physical wounds. They nestled deep within his psyche, manifesting in health struggles that increasingly confined him to the walls of his modest home. Mr. Thompson had battled health issues for years, none more critical than his reliance on oxygen tanks delivered weekly. He faced each day with a mix of determination and vulnerability that deeply resonated with those who knew him. His spirit was unwavering, despite the toll that it took on his body. As his neighbor, I admired not only his bravery, but also his profound kindness. He often shared stories of hope and resilience over cups of tea on sunny afternoons. Those moments created an unspoken bond that formed between us. Ours was not merely a relationship built on proximity, but one woven into the fabric of community support and connection. Mr. Thompson would offer sage advice on caring for my garden or speak passionately about local history while I listened intently, sometimes forgetting the world outside his front porch. In return, I would check in on him regularly, ensuring he had everything he needed. However, as time wore on, Mr. Thompson's health began to decline. The oxygen tanks delivered weekly were more than just medical equipment. They represented his lifeline. Each week, the delivery driver navigated our neighborhood carefully so as not to disrupt the tranquil surroundings that our HOA zealously protected. But this tranquility would soon be shattered by bureaucratic rigidity when the HOA decided that even essential services weren't exempt from their stringent parking guidelines. Little did they know what hung in the balance with their iron-fisted enforcement, a life that still held so many stories yet to be told. As I reflect on that bond forged through care and shared experiences, it's impossible to ignore how quickly circumstances can change and how fragile life truly is. The Homeowners Association, HOA, in our community had always been a double-edged sword. On one hand, it aimed to uphold the neighborhood's aesthetic appeal and maintain property values, which many residents appreciated. On the other hand, their strict enforcement of rules often created friction among the very people they were supposed to serve. Established years prior to maintain a certain standard, the HOA had an array of regulations covering everything from lawn care to architectural modifications. Most notably, parking guidelines were etched into the community bylaws with little room for interpretation or exception. While these regulations might have seemed innocuous at first glance, they became a source of contention over time. Many residents found themselves at odds with the HOA's rigid adherence to rules that felt increasingly out of touch with the realities of life. Complaints about arbitrary fines and bureaucratic red tape circulated at community meetings, creating an atmosphere where neighbors often felt pitted against one another rather than united by shared interests. It was in this context of rising tensions that Mr. Thompson's situation unfolded. The delivery truck bringing him oxygen tanks was viewed through the HOA's lens of compliance rather than compassion. Their parking guidelines dictated that no vehicle could block driveways or cul-de-sacs, a rule enforced with zeal even when it was evident that exceptions could and should be made in cases of medical necessity. The HOA saw itself as the guardian of order and propriety, but this came at a significant cost to those whose lives were dependent on more flexible interpretations of their rules. As I began to witness the unfolding drama surrounding Mr. Thompson's deliveries, I realized how limited the HOA was in its understanding of individual circumstances. Neighbors would grumble about the rules, but often felt powerless to challenge them directly, fearing repercussions or fines themselves. The HOA had cultivated an environment where compliance was king, leaving little room for empathy or understanding. The chilling reality was that while Mr. Thompson struggled for breath and relied on timely deliveries, the HOA remained steadfast in its archaic regulations, blind to the human stakes involved. This rigid enforcement not only strained relationships among residents, but also threatened the very lives they claimed to protect through their policies, a contradiction that would soon become painfully evident as events spiraled toward tragedy. The weekly delivery of oxygen tanks was much more than a mere convenience for Mr. Thompson. It was a matter of life and death. Each tank contained the essential oxygen he needed to breathe and maintain his health, allowing him to step outside his home and engage with the world around him, even if only briefly. The logistics surrounding these deliveries were quite structured. The delivery driver would arrive at the same time each week, navigating through our cul-de-sac with care to avoid disrupting anyone's day while ensuring Mr. Thompson received the necessary supplies promptly. These deliveries required coordination and timing. A few minutes' delay could result in critical consequences for Mr. Thompson, whose condition was precarious at best. With the tanks positioned in the truck, the driver would carefully maneuver to back up into the cul-de-sac, ensuring that he could get close enough to Mr. Thompson's front door without obstructing traffic, which often flowed freely with neighbors going about their business. This routine became an anchor point for both Mr. Thompson and the community, a reminder of his continued struggle and resilience. However, on that fateful day, everything changed. The HOA members, having already created an environment of fear with their unyielding enforcement of rules, decided that the delivery truck's presence violated the coveted parking guidelines. As the truck approached, two HOA representatives stood firmly at the entrance to our cul-de-sac, arms crossed in defiance. They were resolute in blocking access, citing violations, completely unaware, or perhaps uncaring of what lay at stake. When I arrived moments later, the scene unfolded before me like a chilling tableau. Mr. Thompson's lifeline was being cordoned off by those who symbolized bureaucratic rigidity rather than community support. I felt compelled to intervene, believing I could carry the tanks inside myself and get them to him before it was too late. But as I reached for the open doors of the delivery truck, HOA members physically stopped me, insisting I retreat immediately or face fines and potential legal action for obstructing their efficient governance. Disbelief coursed through me as panic took hold. Their blind adherence to rules at this critical moment felt like a betrayal of our shared humanity. Unbeknownst to them, I had a camera hidden in my pocket capturing every desperate plea and dramatic interaction. As their threats echoed in my ears, another reality bore down with horrifying finality. Mr. Thompson's chance to receive his oxygen quickly was slipping away while they held firm in their unyielding stance. As I stood there watching the delivery truck being blocked by the HOA members, a surge of desperation washed over me. I could feel my heart racing, a mix of panic and determination surging through my veins. There was no time to waste. Mr. Thompson depended on those oxygen tanks, and I couldn't just stand idly by while bureaucratic rules threatened his very life. With my mind set on helping him, I hurried toward the truck, my thoughts consumed by the urgency of the situation. Every step felt heavy with purpose, fueled by the bond we had formed. I recalled our many conversations, his laughter as he recounted stories from his youth, the wisdom he shared about resilience, and how he always took a moment to express gratitude for those who showed him kindness amidst his struggles. This was my chance to return that kindness. As I reached the side of the delivery truck, the driver looked at me with a mixture of hope and concern. I could sense he wanted to help but felt powerless against the unfinished business of HOA regulations. Without hesitation, I swung open the doors, revealing those gleaming tanks that were more than just metal containers. They were Mr. Thompson's lifeline. With sheer determination, I lifted one tank into my arms, feeling its weight but refusing to let it deter me. Each step toward Mr. Thompson's home felt monumental. Adrenaline coursed through me as I navigated through the cul-de-sac with careful urgency. I could almost visualize Mr. Thompson waiting, his breath shallow but hopeful as he anticipated relief from his struggle. But then there was the abrupt halt. HOA members quickly closed in around me, their expressions cold and resolute. My heart sank as they physically blocked my path, their voices rising in threats of fines and legal repercussions. The words stung like a slap. How could they prioritize rules over life? The moment felt surreal. Here I was trying to save a man who had bravely served our country, yet these enforcers of compliance were prepared to let him suffocate under their rigid guidelines. Frustration bubbled within me as I stood between my determination to help and their relentless obstruction. I wanted to scream out for compassion, for understanding, anything to pierce through their cold facade. But all that came was a profound sadness mingled with a stubborn resolve to hold on to hope that there would still be a way to reach Mr. Thompson before it was too late. As I stood there, tank in hand and adrenaline surging through me, the HOA representatives encircled me with an air of authority that felt all too oppressive. Their expressions were steely, faces hardened against any semblance of compassion or understanding. I approached them, breathless from urgency, pleading for them to reconsider. "Please, Mr. Thompson needs these tanks now," I implored, desperation creasing my voice as I gestured toward the delivery truck. But their response was swift and uncaring. One member stepped forward, his posture rigid, arms crossed like a sentry guarding an impenetrable fortress. "You can't take that in," he declared flatly, as if it were a simple rule infraction rather than a matter of life and death. His tone dripped with condescension and authority as he continued, "This vehicle is violating our parking guidelines. You'll be fined if you don't step away." A knot tightened in my stomach as I faced the reality of their rigidity. "You don't understand. This is about health, his health." My voice rose out of frustration while the surreal nature of the situation crashed down around us like a heavy fog. Did they really believe they could enforce rules above the value of a human life? Their lack of empathy struck me like a cold slap across the face. The other members chimed in with threats of legal action against anyone who dared obstruct their ordinance enforcement. "You think you can just ignore what's on paper?" Another member snapped, stepping closer as if to intimidate me further. "Follow the rules or face consequences." They seemed unfazed by my pleas. Their minds were made up and set on maintaining order at any cost. I felt a swell of betrayal and anger rise within me. How could they be so oblivious to Mr. Thompson's struggle? It was incomprehensible that those entrusted with our community's well-being would instead enforce regulations in such an inhumane way. The air thickened with tension as time kept marching forward, punctuated only by the escalating urgency to get those tanks into his home. As neighbors watched this confrontation unfold, murmurs filled the air. A combination of disbelief and frustration echoed around us. But still not one voice rallied to support my cause against these enforcers, who seemed intent on ignoring the dire stakes at play. My heart sank lower as I realized how alone I felt within this seemingly helpless battle against an organization more concerned about rules than about real lives impacted by their decisions. Each second lost felt like a dagger, poised mercilessly above Mr. Thompson's fate as they stood resolute against me, prioritizing governance over compassion without ever looking back to acknowledge the man we both dearly cared for, a veteran teetering on the brink of crisis. The confrontation with the HOA members left me reeling, but even as their harsh words echoed in my ears, my thoughts were solely on Mr. Thompson. He was relying on those oxygen tanks, and I knew the minutes lost could mean the difference between life and death. With a heavy heart, I rushed to his door, praying that somehow he had managed to hold on during the agonizing delay. As I entered his home, the first thing that struck me was the silence, an unsettling stillness that seemed to hang in the air like a thick fog. I found Mr. Thompson slumped in his chair, pale and gasping for breath. The sight sent a wave of dread crashing over me. I quickly set the tank down and connected it to his oxygen machine, but it felt like an eternity before he started to breathe more easily. Despite my efforts, I could see that he was still struggling, his face etched with pain and fear. "Hang on, Mr. Thompson," I urged, my voice trembling. "Help is on the way." But even as I spoke those words, a cold weight settled in my chest, a gnawing fear that it might already be too late. Minutes dragged on like hours as we sat there together. I held his hand tightly, trying to impart strength through connection. But soon, those feeble breaths began to waver and falter. My heart sank further into despair as I realized how fragile life truly was, how someone so full of stories and laughter now faced an uncertain fate. Before long, Mr. Thompson's breathing grew shallow and erratic. Panic surged within me as I fumbled for my phone to call for help. But deep down, I sensed that time was slipping away from us like sand through fingers. Finally, with one last labored gasp, he fell silent. The air in the room turned electric with grief as I crumpled beside him, tears streaming down my cheeks. My neighbor, the vibrant storyteller who had shared so much of his life with me, was gone. The reality of his absence crashed down around me like a tidal wave, leaving me feeling hollow and distraught. News of Mr. Thompson's death spread quickly through our community like wildfire. Shock and disbelief rippled among neighbors who had witnessed our confrontation with the HOA. Many were equally horrified by the reality that compliance with arbitrary rules had seemingly cost a good man his life. Conversations shifted from casual greetings to urgent discussions about accountability and change. As grief enveloped me, anger began to simmer beneath the surface. a fierce determination to ensure this tragedy would not be forgotten or dismissed. The HOA's rigid adherence to policies had claimed more than just parking spaces. It had taken away a cherished member of our community who deserved compassion and respect in his final days. In that moment of profound loss, I resolved to voice not only my sorrow, but also the urgent need for change within our community. A change that would honor Mr. Thompson's legacy by preventing such negligence from occurring again. In the chaos of that fateful day, as the reality of Mr. Thompson's death settled heavily on my heart, I realized something crucial. I had recorded the entire confrontation with the HOA members. It was a decision made in a moment of instinct, something to capture the truth of what had happened when I felt powerless. As I replayed those moments on my phone, each word spoken by the representatives rang vividly in my ears, their aggressive threats echoing back like a haunting reminder of their indifference. The recording was not just documentation, it was evidence of how bureaucratic rigidity had directly contributed to a tragic loss. I felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility to share this footage, not only to shed light on what transpired, but also to ensure Mr. Thompson's story didn't slip into obscurity without consequence. He deserved far more than that. I made the decision to reach out to local media outlets, understanding that this wasn't just a personal battle. It was about uncovering the need for accountability within our community's governing structures. Armed with the video evidence, I contacted a journalist who had covered previous stories related to community issues and shared my account along with the recording. They quickly recognized its potential impact, both as a human interest piece and as a critical exposé on the failings of our HOA. Simultaneously, I reached out to Mr. Thompson's family, knowing they deserved to see firsthand the circumstances surrounding his untimely passing. With deep empathy, I explained what had transpired and offered them the recording as well. Sharing it with them felt important. It brought some semblance of transparency during their unimaginable grief and provided critical context about how their loved one's health concerns were overlooked in favor of cold regulations. As news spread and coverage began circulating, conversations ignited throughout our community about governance and compassion, or rather, the lack thereof, in our HOA's policies. The footage served not only as evidence but rallied neighbors who shared similar frustrations about strict enforcement, often overshadowing common decency. The fallout was rapid. Within weeks, pressure mounted for accountability at every level of leadership within our HOA. Criminal negligence charges were brought against them, including civil lawsuits initiated by Mr. Thompson's family against the HOA president, specifically for failing to act humanely in crisis situations. In those moments, through grief and determination intertwined with hope for change, I realized that this small act, the choice to record, might carry far-reaching consequences beyond my immediate emotions or anger toward bureaucratic failure. It became clear that standing up for what is right could ripple through a community seeking justice while honoring Mr. Thompson's legacy. A legacy founded on service and resilience that would not be easily forgotten. Once the local media received my recording of the confrontation with the HOA members, the response was immediate and powerful. The story quickly gained traction, leading to headlines that not only reported the tragedy itself, but also scrutinized the rigid enforcement of HOA rules that seemingly prioritized compliance over human life. Reporters interviewed residents, capturing their shock and outrage over Mr. Thompson's death and exploring broader implications for community governance. Local news outlets featured segments that highlighted not just this incident, but also the overarching issues related to HOA practices in our neighborhood and beyond. Many residents began speaking out about their own experiences with harsh rule enforcement, sparking discussions on social media platforms that garnered thousands of shares and comments. It became clear that Mr. Thompson's story resonated deeply within the community, igniting a burning desire for change. Public reactions were an overwhelming mix of sorrow, anger, and empathy towards the veteran's family, and many took to community forums to advocate for amending HOA policies regarding medical emergencies. Several neighbors expressed frustration over regulations that seemed arbitrary compared to the real-world impacts they had on vulnerable residents like Mr. Thompson. This incident became a rallying cry for those wanting more compassionate governance, emphasizing the need for HOAs to consider personal circumstances before imposing strict penalties. As conversations escalated, it became evident that other neighborhoods were reevaluating their own HOA practices as well, looking at ways to implement changes that would prevent similar tragedies. Articles began appearing in regional news sources about the dangers of inflexible guidelines in communities where individuals might face life-threatening situations. The momentum grew rapidly, bringing increased attention to issues around governance and accountability across multiple localities. With increasing scrutiny on the HOA in our community, public pressure began mounting. Activists started organizing meetings aimed at revising bylaws to include exceptions for emergency deliveries and health-related accommodations. The emotional weight of Mr. Thompson's story transformed into actionable change. People were no longer willing to remain silent while airtight regulations endangered lives. As I watched this transformation unfold through media coverage and community dialogues, it was overwhelmingly clear that my decision to share the recording had sparked a significant movement centered around compassion and accountability. While Mr. Thompson was tragically lost, his legacy now fueled a collective commitment to ensure such bureaucratic indifference would not claim another life in our community or beyond. As discussions converged towards a common goal of systemic reform, I felt a bittersweet sense of hope dancing alongside my grief, a testament to Mr. Thompson's spirit and the ongoing fight for justice in his name. The fallout from Mr. Thompson's tragic death unfolded rapidly as the community grappled with the implications of the HOA's actions. Following the media coverage that highlighted the negligence surrounding his situation, outrage bubbled up among residents. They began to demand accountability, fueled by a mix of grief and anger over the loss of a beloved neighbor, a Vietnam veteran who had served his country with honor only to be let down in his time of need. Legal repercussions came swiftly. The local authorities launched an investigation into the circumstances surrounding Mr. Thompson's death, scrutinizing the HOA's role in blocking access to the delivery truck that provided him with life-sustaining oxygen. The evidence gathered from my recording played a pivotal role in illustrating how the HOA's strict adherence to parking regulations directly contributed to a life-threatening scenario. As the investigation unfolded, charges of criminal negligence were officially brought against the HOA. This was not merely a symbolic gesture. It marked a significant moment where a governing body was held accountable for its actions, or lack thereof, that had catastrophic consequences. The community rallied behind this initiative, urging authorities to pursue not only justice for Mr. Thompson, but also systemic changes that would prevent such tragedies from happening again. In addition to criminal charges, civil lawsuits were initiated by Mr. Thompson's family against the HOA president and other board members for their failure to respond compassionately during an emergency. This legal action sent shockwaves through the community as it illuminated the broader implications of bureaucratic indifference and sparked deeper discussions about governance and responsibility. As news of these legal proceedings spread, residents began attending town hall meetings in droves, demanding reforms to HOA regulations and advocating for guidelines that would prioritize medical emergencies over rigid compliance with rules. Activists within the community emerged, calling for new policies that would allow flexibility in enforcement when someone's health was at stake. The outrage reached such intensity that neighboring communities began reevaluating their own HOA practices, leading to a ripple effect of advocacy for compassionate governance across multiple neighborhoods. Articles began appearing in regional newspapers discussing the dangers of inflexible guidelines and sharing stories from other residents who had faced similar struggles. Through all these developments, it became clear that Mr. Thompson's legacy extended beyond his individual story. It galvanized a movement for change that challenged entrenched practices and emphasized the importance of empathy in community governance. As legal repercussions loomed over the HOA leadership, I felt a renewed sense of hope that perhaps this tragedy might lead to meaningful reforms, changes that could save lives and ensure that no one else would suffer due to bureaucratic callousness again. Reflecting on the events surrounding Mr. Thompson's tragic death, I find myself grappling with profound themes of community responsibility, civic duty, and compassion for those who have served our country. The pain of losing a neighbor who had shared his life and stories with me lingers heavily, serving as a stark reminder of the consequences that can arise when systems prioritize rules over human life. In the wake of this tragedy, I've come to understand that being part of a community entails more than simply coexisting within the same physical space. It means actively looking out for one another, especially those who are most vulnerable. Mr. Thompson was not just a veteran, he was a father, a friend, and an integral member of our neighborhood. His reliance on oxygen tanks was a testament to his courage in facing health challenges while still engaging with our lives regularly. It pains me to think that bureaucratic indifference could strip him of that basic dignity in his time of need. My experience during the confrontation with the HOA opened my eyes to the importance of standing up against unjust regulations that threaten lives. I felt an intense urge to help Mr. Thompson when I saw how unyielding the HOA was in enforcing their rules without any consideration for his situation. This incident highlighted how vital it is for individuals within a community to advocate for change when policies become detrimental rather than helpful. Civic duty is not just about voting or paying taxes. It is about participating in conversations that shape our communities and ensuring that everyone's voice is heard, especially those who have historically been marginalized or overlooked. As we witnessed the community band together after Mr. Thompson's death, it became clear that collective action can lead to meaningful reform when people choose to prioritize compassion over compliance. The story has sparked discussions about veterans' rights and health care issues beyond our neighborhood, urging others to reflect on how similar bureaucratic failures could impact their own loved ones. It reminds us all that change often begins with one individual willing to speak up and challenge the status quo. While I carry the weight of grief for Mr. Thompson's loss, it fuels my determination to ensure that such tragedies do not repeat themselves in our community or beyond. We must remain vigilant guardians of one another's well-being, champions for those who cannot speak for themselves, and advocate tirelessly for compassionate governance that prioritizes human dignity above all else. In honoring Mr. Thompson's legacy through these efforts, I hope we can create a more empathetic and responsible community where no one feels alone in their struggles again. As I reflect on the profound lessons learned from this painful experience, several key themes emerge regarding the importance of advocacy, responsibility within communities, and the power of individual voices to effect significant change. Mr. Thompson's story is not just a tale of loss. It is a poignant reminder of how complacency can perpetuate harm and how one person's courage to speak out can inspire collective action. Throughout this ordeal, I have come to recognize that true civic duty extends beyond mere compliance with regulations or quiet acceptance of policies that govern our lives. It involves an active commitment to ensuring the well-being of all community members, especially those who may be vulnerable or marginalized. Mr. Thompson's reliance on oxygen tanks symbolized not only his personal battle for survival, but also the broader struggle many face in navigating bureaucratic systems that often overlook individual needs. Advocating for those unable to advocate for themselves is an essential part of fostering a compassionate community. This incident has also underscored the necessity of holding governing bodies accountable for their actions or inactions. The charges brought against the HOA for criminal negligence were a direct response to a failure in governance that had tragic consequences, a potent reminder that rules devoid of humanity can lead to real harm. I learned that it is imperative to challenge unjust regulations not only as an act of personal integrity, but as a responsibility to our shared humanity. Moreover, my decision to record the confrontation with the HOA was driven by instinct, but it became a critical tool for accountability and justice. It highlighted how transparency can catalyze important conversations about governance and inspire others to take action. When individuals dare to raise their voices against injustice, it creates ripples, unanticipated but powerful, that can lead to significant policy changes. As we work towards honoring Mr. Thompson's legacy, it is essential that we remain vigilant guardians of one another's rights and well-being. His story serves as an impetus for ongoing discussions about compassion in governance, ensuring that we prioritize human dignity in all our decisions moving forward. Ultimately, this experience has reinforced my belief in the strength of community solidarity and the impact of civic engagement. One voice can indeed lead to significant changes in policy when it resonates with others, urging them to join the fight for justice, particularly for those who have served our country and deserve respect and care. In honoring Mr. Thompson, we commit ourselves to build a more empathetic society where all individuals are valued and supported, because no one should ever feel alone in their struggle again.